Hi, Al. How are you?
I'm good. What's going on?
I thought it'd be good to start the interview by asking for a bit of advice, really, because I work mainly from this nice hall. It's about kind of 40 feet by 40 feet. I'm just starting to get some orchestral work coming through. And while I've got some great microphones, I don't have a lot of great microphones. So I kind of wanted to ask you, do you think some good techniques would be for kind of more minimal miking of big groups?
Oh, wow. On an orchestra, it depends on the studio and the room and what kind of a sound you're looking for. I mean, you could get by recording an orchestra with four microphones if you have the right ones. What I try to do is I, on strings and brass and things, I've been using a lot of 67s, Neumann U67s, and I keep them in Omni, so that I'm getting all the room and everything else. And that's pretty much my technique and what I've been doing for years.
Where are you normally placing those?
Well, I'm placing them up over, on the string section. They would be up overhead, maybe 10 feet up over the strings. Um, that's pretty much it. And, I try to make sure that the mics are in a position to be able to cover all the instruments in the string section. Um, it's pretty hard to talk about it. It would be a lot easier if I could draw a diagram and show you but we don't have that.
How has recording orchestras and big band changed over the decades in terms of kind of number of mics, that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, obviously back when I started, everything was mono and two track, and we only had when I started, we had 8 inputs on the console. When I was doing all the Mancini things, we had 16 inputs. So I could put up 16 microphones. And that was it. So we had to figure out ways of, you couldn't put a mic on every trombone or every trumpet. We try to condense it down and instead of using maybe 8 mics, wind up using 2 microphones.
Were those normally then pretty distant from the group to kind of get an overall picture?
Not too distant. In front of, if it's a big band, it'd be in front of the trumpets and trombones, maybe 5 feet in front of the trumpets and trombones, and we'd have 2 mics. And then make sure we'd listen to make sure we got the right blend. And if not, we'd move the mics until we did get the right blend between the trumpets and trombones. So it's a matter of where you put the mics and listening, going outside, listening what's happening outside, and then coming in the control room, opening the mics and seeing what you're capturing there. And if it's not the same, then you go out and readjust the microphone.
How did these techniques change as it went into the 60s and 70s?
Well, as we got into 24 track and 48 track, and now, of course, we're into Pro Tools, where unlimited tracks. We can, I put if I'm doing a big band, there'll be 4 mics on the trombones and 4 mics on the trumpets. So that's 8 mics compared to just 2 that we used to use. We have the ability to do it now. Same with the saxophones. I would always use 2 mics on the saxophones years ago on 5 saxophones. Now I use 5 mics. So, the ability to not worry about how many tracks and having to combine things made a big difference, So, and in general, the consoles got larger, they went from, 8 inputs to 16 to 24, and now, the consoles are unlimited. So, the Neve 88 that I use a lot is just amazing console with plenty of space for microphones.
Maybe if we talk about some more kind of traditional rock instruments, maybe if you start with the drums, what were the kind of standard recording techniques when you were working at RCA in terms of recording drums?
Well, back in those days, we used to use two mics on the drums, one on the overhead and one down on the kick. And that was it. Now, today, I use a mic on the kick, two mics on the snare, mic on a hi-hat, a mic on each tom, and two overheads. So it went from two mics to what, 8, 10? Yeah, so it's quite a difference now.
Would those have been RCA ribbon mics back then?
Well, I used a lot of RCA ribbon mics. I also used a lot of the Telefunken U47s and Alltech microphones. So yeah, we had a lot of great stuff back then that we used, and RCA ribbon microphones were all great. So now it's changed, and we're using a lot more tube microphones. I just prefer the sound of the tube mics, and I love Neumann microphones. Anything from 47 to 48 to 67 to I have a couple of really 149s that I have 5 of those that I use all the time. So anyway, I have a pretty good collection of microphones. I have a lot of Royer mics and a lot of Audio Technica mics. So I'm a mic freak, and when new mics come out, I always like to get a copy of a mic and check it out and try it out and see what it works on.
What are some of your favorite close mics on drums?
Well, let's see. Lately on the overheads on drums, I was using Audio Technica 5045s on the overheads, and now I've been using the new Telefunken, the Neumann U47, 67, the new one. You know, the one that's $7,000. And I've been using that on overheads. On on a kick, I have a D12 that I use on the kick that I love, an great old microphone. On the snare, I use a 452 on top and a 57 under the snare, and I put it at a phase. On a hi-hat, I'm using a 452 on a hi-hat. And then on the toms, I've been using these clip-on mics that Audio Technica makes that I really like. And it gets rid of a lot of mic stands, and they're easy. You clip them on the drums, and they're really easy and out of the way, and they don't, the drummer doesn't hit them or whatever. So, pretty cool. Anyway.
Have you noticed any differences between the new Neumann U67s and the original ones?
We did a bunch of tests at Capitol. They have 16 of the old ones, and I have 2 of the new ones. And we did a bunch of tests, and we couldn't tell the difference. They were sounding so good. They're great microphones. And for the price, a vintage 67 is probably going around $15,000 now. And you can get a new one for $7,000. And they're really great mics.
Are there any other mics that have come out in the last few years that you've been a big fan of?
That I like? Oh, yeah. There's Audio Technica. There's a 50, the Audio Technica 5045. I love that mic. A 5047 is another one that they've come out with that I like. Royer microphones. I love the Royer ribbons. I have about 12 of them, and I love them. I have a great Royer stereo ribbon microphone that I use a lot on overheads. over the conductor, for the room. Um, I don't know. There's just so many great microphones. Um, so I'm always like, if something new comes out, I always try to get a hold of the manufacturer, get a copy, and check it out, see what it'll do.
Just moving on to electric guitar, what were some of the kind of standard techniques when you started, and how have they changed over time up till now?
Wow. Well, when I started, we were using 57s on the guitar amps. And now we're using Royer microphones. I'm using Royer on the guitar amps a lot. Audio Technica makes a 4080 ribbon microphone that I like a lot. I use that sometimes on amps. So, and then on the actual guitar itself, I've been using the Audio Technica, the 5045 on the on acoustic guitars. I like that a lot. It's got a really nice bright sound to it, and small microphone, doesn't get in the way.
What were some mics that they were using for electric and acoustic guitar back in kind of RCA in the 60s?
Wow, and back then I think I was using probably an RCA 44 microphone on guitar, or the 77, the RCA 77 ribbon on guitar. There was another mic, a Western Electric 639. I think that's the number, 639. I used a lot also. That was a nice microphone.
And I know you quite often say that you don't use very much EQ, but were you having to use EQ back then when you were using ribbon microphones quite a lot?
We didn't have any EQ back then.
Right.
There was no. We only had one equalizer, and if you patched it in, it equalized everything. So we never used it. So Tommy Dowd, who was my mentor, and we used the microphones for EQ. If we wanted a brighter sound, we used a brighter microphone. If we wanted a warmer sound, we used a warmer microphone. So that's the way I learned. I still don't use any EQ when I record.
Speaking of Tom Dowd, obviously you've been a very influential engineer for a lot of people. But who were some engineers who influenced you when you were starting?
Well, Tommy Dowd, number one. My uncle, Harry Schmitt, from the time I was a little kid, I'd be around him at his studio and watching. So those were two big influences. There was a guy by the name of Bob Doherty that I learned how to record orchestras from. He was a big influence on my life. And that's pretty much it, If I heard something I liked that an engineer was doing, I would call him up and say, "Hey, I love the sound you got on that. How did you do that? What did you use?" And they would always let me know. I don't have secrets, and most engineers I know, good engineers, don't have secrets. And they would let me know, and then that would be something I could try, and then maybe I would try that and use maybe in a different way to get what I wanted.
Did your working methods change very much when things like compressors became more common in studios?
Somewhat, not a lot. I don't use a lot of compression. I might use a little on a vocal when I'm doing a vocal, and I try to use, a Fairchild if I have one around. But normally I learned, we used to do hand limiting by writing gain on the fader, with the vocalist. and learning the song and learning where they get loud and where they get soft and ride gain and bring them down a little bit when they get too loud and bring them up a little bit when they get too soft and try to do it so it was unnoticeable.
Talking about some other instruments, what are some of your favourite techniques for recording electric bass?
Wow. Electric bass, wow. Well, certainly any of the Steely Dan records, any of the Toto 4, those records. There are so many great electric bass players, and half the time they bring their own pickup, or whatever. But if not, we have them, and you get Abraham Laboriel, or you get oh God, there's so many great players, and they usually come in with their own setup. If not, I have a great one. I use God, there's so many numbers now. I'm trying to think. Firefly, the Firefly. That's what I've been using on the pickup, and I love that. I can't remember the company that makes it, a Canadian company. Anyway, it's great.
I wanted to ask you about working with Steely Dan, because I interviewed Lenise Bent recently, who also worked on some of those records. And she was kind of telling me some stories about how particular they were when recording. Do you have any memories of working with them?
Oh, yeah, I have a lot of memories of working with them. And, yeah, they were very particular. It had to be perfect. I mean, you'd go over it. We did one mix on Peg. It took us 12 hours to mix that one song because there was so much going on and there was no automation in the board. So there were 4 of us from, Walter and Donald and Carrie Katz and me. And we'd run it. Each mix was a performance, and I'd get it right. Someone else would get something wrong. Somebody else, everybody'd get it right. I'd get something wrong. So we kept going over and over and over. It took us 12 hours to mix Peg. I'd never spent 12 hours on a mix in my life. It was the longest ever. But they were great. I love working with them because you always knew the project was going to be what's going to sound awesome. They were so particular about sounds and just about each note. And when you're working with the best, it's always a joy. And you always learn something from people like that.
Was it difficult working on projects where there'd be a lot of rotating musicians?
No, not really. No, not really at all. If you're talking about like rotating a drummer or the bass player, no, not at all. It was just, we would just, set them up, get their sound and go. It's not rocket science, You just got to know what the drums sound like or what the instrument sounds like, where to put the microphone, what microphone to use. Pretty simple, really.
I'd like to ask about some other people that you've worked with too. What was working with Quincy Jones like?
Wow, I go back with Quincy many, many years. Great, Quincy's great. He's the kind of guy that's pretty much hands off. He lets the arranger and the engineer do their thing, and then until there's something that he specifically wants, and then he'll let everybody know.
Does anything stand out when you think about working with Paul McCartney?
Oh, yeah, there's so many things that stand out working with Paul McCartney. First of all, he's one of the nicest people I've ever worked with. He is such a wonderful guy, so to people, so considerate of other people. Just a wonderful guy, a wonderful, amazing talent, and a fun guy to hang with, And he did the foreword on my book, which is great. And he talked about how I would tell stories about the Jefferson Airplane and Sam Cooke, and then he would come in and start telling stories, and it just got to be a real fun project, a fun time. And at the end of the sessions, sometimes we just sit around and talk, tell stories.
Is there anything different when you approach recording an artist who has a long legacy like him?
No, no. I just know that, you know, I do the best I can do, and I'm pretty good at what I do, and you know, I don't get any complaints. So he was very happy with when he came in and heard his voice. It sounded great. He was thrilled with that, and everything. Just the balances were all there. As he said, when he came in to listen back, it sounded like a finished record. You know, and of course I have the right echo and, you know, everything in the right place. So it was a joy working with him. I'd love to work with him again. He is just the greatest guy in the world.
Could you talk a bit about your transition from being a recording engineer to being a producer and having a more hands-on role later on in your career?
You know, when I started, and I was an engineer at RCA, and I was doing all the big records, Mancini and all the big artists and everything else. And then a lot of people would call up and want to use me on sessions. And they would come in and they would be on the phone through the whole session, and I'd be doing all the work. So I finally figured out, wait a minute, these guys are getting all the money and all the notoriety and everything, and you know, I got to do that. So I talked to my boss, and I got a promotion up to producing, and I wound up producing a lot of records for RCA and a lot of artists, Sam Cooke, Jefferson Airplane, on and on. And but I realized at one point in 1970 that I missed recording. I missed mixing. I mixed, you know, recording. Production was, I just wasn't happy with it anymore. It just wasn't what I wanted to do or why I got into the business. So I slowly transformed back into being an engineer. I did some engineer and producing with Neil Young and with Jackson Brown and people like that after I left RCA and with the Jefferson Airplane. But my first love was recording music and recording bands and orchestras, and that's when I'm my happiest.
Could you talk a bit about how you came to work with Neil Young?
He called me out of the blue. His manager did, Elliot Roberts, who just passed away, by the way. Anyway, he called me and said, you know, Neil wants to work on a project, and you want to get together with him. And I did. I got together with Neil and we talked, and he said he wanted to set the studio up like a living room. And so we did that. This was we were at Studio One at Sunset Sound, which is a great room, by the way. And so we set it up. We had couches and lamps and everything, and that's how that was recorded. One of the funny things about that record is that we would have people come in. It was all on tape, and we were using a lot of tape. And so people would come in, and the record people, the company, they'd want to hear things. So we'd have to get the tape and put it on and play it, and then take that off and put another tape on to play another song. And so we decided to make some rough mixes so we wouldn't have to do that. So we made rough mixes down to 2-track. And when people came in, we could play the rough mixes. And we just threw them together. We made them in about, I think the 3 songs we did in about 20 minutes. Anyway, when the album was finished, and I said to Neil, okay, Neil, when are we going to start mixing? He said, Al, I've been listening to these rough mixes and I love them. And I'm going to use the rough mixes. And I said, oh, no, Neil, you can't do that. I said, I'll pay for the studio myself. Just let me mix them. I know I can. No, I'm happy with these, Neil. Al, he said, if you want to go in and do it, I'll go ahead. But I'm using these anyway, so don't waste your time. And that was it. So Neil's, to this day, he'll be talking to somebody and my name will come up and he'll say, oh, hey, ask Al if he still wants a remix on the beach, because it's kind of a running joke with us at this point. But I love Neil, and I've been blessed to work with him quite a bit, and he's an amazing guy, an amazing artist.
Can you think of any other unusual environments that you've recorded in?
Unusual environment? Wow. You know, I've recorded in a lot of nightclubs, and you know, I recorded Sam Cooke live at the Copa, and I recorded a lot of folk groups at the Hungry Eye up in San Francisco. Not that I can think of. I can't think of anything really unusual.
What are some of your techniques for recording a band in a live environment like that?
I like to set them up as close as get them sounding comfortable so they all can hear well. Preferably, it's nice if you can get them to all hear without using earphones. But, you know, if they are, then that's it. Set them up, and then my job is to capture that sound. And so I try to, put the mics in the right place and try to get a good balance. And that's pretty much it, and capture the feel. You don't want to keep a band playing over and over and over again, you know, because sometimes, you know, like when we did George Benson Breezin', you know, we would go on and do 5, 6 takes, 7 takes, and somebody'd say, man, that first take was pretty damn good. Let's hear that again. And we'd listen to the first take, and that would be it, you know. It had a special feeling to it, spontaneity. You know, the first time down, it was just new to everybody, and it was great. So, you know, in that album, on the Breezin' album, I think 5 of the takes that we did were, the 5 of the songs we did were the first take.
If you're recording a band live in front of an audience, like with Sam Cooke, do you have any special techniques for working with that?
No, they set up the way they're going to set up. And then it's, it's up to you to put the microphones so you can capture everything. Recording him at the Copa, recording Diana Krall live in Paris, you know, they set up. And then it's my job to be able to put mics around and capture everything without all the mics being in the way. So, it just takes experience, really. If you're not sure, ask people that have done it before and how they've done it and what the best way to do certain things. Don't be afraid to ask.
Are there any particular records that when people come to work with you, they quote as the one that made them want to work with you?
Oh, God, there's so many, so many of the records that I did with Sam Cooke, that I did with Diana Krall, Natalie Cole. A lot of people come and say, oh, man, I love the way that record sounded. And, they're hoping that they can get the same thing on their record. And sometimes we can get close, but, it's not quite the same as if when Natalie was singing it or Johnny Mandel did the arrangement, So, I try to capture things as best I can and keep the client and the artist happy. and I've had enough experience to be able to keep the artist from getting into trouble, or the producer in some cases when they're new and young. Uh, so, all my experience certainly helps out at those times.
Could you talk a bit about your approach to using reverb?
Oh, my approach to using reverb. Well, um, we always had a live chamber in the studios I worked with, at least one. And in New York at Fulton, we had a great live chamber that Tommy Dowd and I used to shellac all the time to keep it, bright. Um, and then when I went to RCA, we had 5 live chambers, and they were all amazing and all sounded great. So sometimes I would use all 5 live chambers on records. I love good echo. Capitals, of course. Their echo chambers are world famous, and I'm blessed that I get to work there a lot. And I have one special chamber there, number 4, that I use a lot, and I use it on vocals all the time. So yeah, it's echo can make a big difference in the way your records sound. On vocals, I'll use a live chamber and a McCartney. I'll use 2 echoes or 2 reverbs, one in the live chamber and one in the McCartney. And then I'll do a blend of the 2 to get what I want. And I just screw around with it until it sounds exactly the way I want it, and then I leave it alone.
Do you EQ the reverb returns at all?
No, I don't. No, I keep them the way they are. Some people do, and I think if I had to for an effect, I could, but I don't remember having to do that.
Have you tried the new Universal Audio Capital reverb chamber plugin?
Yeah. I've worked on it. They have one of my settings there. Yeah, it's pretty damn good. It's not like the real thing, but it's as close as you can get. And it's pretty damn good. My friend Nico Bolas has been using it up and his way he's working, and he's been doing all kinds of experimenting with it, and he's come up with some great ways to use it. So it's great. Yeah, I like it. I think it's great. The only problem I had with it, I didn't want to see Capitol give it up. So I always thought people, if you want that chamber, you had to come to Capitol to use it. And now you can't. You can use it anywhere. So again, but it's not quite the same as the real thing.
Do you use any plugins in your work these days?
No, I don't. I don't use plugins. No, once in a while, if I'm working on something and I want to put a little compressor on the congas, I'll talk to my assistant Steve Genoetico or Chandler Harrod, and I'll say, "Can you put a little something?" And they'll add a little plug-in compression, and then they'll mess with it until I say, "Oh yeah, that sounds pretty good. Leave that," and that's it. But normally, I like to use the real thing.
What are some of your favorite vocal microphones?
Vocal microphones? Wow. I love the 47 at Capitol. That's a great mic. 67, the Neumann 67 is great. There's so many great ones. 251 was.
Are there any that have come out in recent years that you've been a fan of?
Yeah, Audio Technica made one that I think it's a 5047. I think it is. That sounds pretty damn good. So I like that on vocal, especially female voices. Really sounds great on that.
Are preamps very important to you for your sound?
Yeah, I have a lot of preamps. Uh, uh, I have 4 of the Mastering Lab 2 preamps that I love. I have Studer. I have 4 of the Studer 2 preamps that I love. I have a bunch of Neve preamps, 1073s, 1081s. I have 8 of a preamp that was made by someone who never. It was just a model that they came up with, and they got me to try it, and I loved it, and I never sent it back, and they went out of business. They never really ever did it. It's called Upstate Audio, and it's great. I use them all the time.
I think that's all my questions. So thank you so much for speaking with me.
Yeah, I'm happy. I hope you got enough, Hamish.